The Cardinals need to do these things to be successful on Friday night.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Friday/game day edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my 6th year covering U of L, 4th year hosting this show. And I want to take the time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Be sure to leave a comment in the YouTube section below, because that's a great way to help this show continue to grow. It is much appreciated. But it's game day here in the 502. Louisville versus James Madison tonight at 7 o'clock at Cardinals Stadium. We're identifying and discussing the keys to success for Jeff Brohm's team. It starts with the battle in the trenches. We'll highlight why Louisville needs to limit the mistakes and play a clean game. The defense also needs to show up, and it needs to show out. We'll tell you what the keys to success are throughout the show, but first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is here. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. Short week for the Cardinals football team. Second game of the 2025 season tonight against the James Madison Dukes. Both teams sitting in the other receiving votes category of the AP poll. This is a game that's kind of gone back and forth in terms of how tough it's going to be. I had someone ask me, well, what do you actually think is going to happen? Because you mentioned that there's a ton of variation between what could happen. I said, well, I think two things are true at one time. I think that James Madison is a good team. I think that they're better than they are being perceived to be. But I also think that if Louisville handles business, they could win this game by a pretty healthy margin. And that's the reason why we're identifying the keys to success versus the keys to victory, because not only is Louisville expected to win this game, they're expected to win this game by double digits. FanDuel has Louisville as a 13.5-point favorite. So keys to success is going to be explaining not only how Louisville can win the game, but also how they can cover the spread. And the first one is centered around the line of scrimmage, because I find it really intriguing, the different styles of play, like the trademark styles of play from different conferences. Like, for example, Big 12 is all about throwing the football all over the field, scoring a ton of points, and, well, having defense being optional. Big 10 is completely different. The game is won in the trenches. A lot of times it's low scoring. It's a defensive slugfest, unless you're Ohio State and you can score a lot of points. But completely contrasting styles. Well, Sun Belt is sort of like the Big 10. And Louisville had a front row seat to witness that style back in 2018 when they hired Scott Satterfield from Appalachian State, because Sat tried to adopt a lot of those same principles here at Louisville, winning the game in the trenches on both sides of the football, ground and pound, running the ball a ton, and seeing if other teams could stop it. You know, I disagreed with David Schultz a couple times in our Locked On Podcast Network crossover between Locked On Louisville and Locked On Sunbelt. I didn't agree with his assessment of the Jeff Brohm era and how it's gone so far and how good he is as a head coach. I didn't agree with his assessment that Louisville is somehow scared of Syracuse, but what I did agree with was that Sunbelt teams, it feels like they tell you what they're going to try to do, and then they see if you can stop it. Like, we know that James Madison is going to run the football a ton. Now, not every team is a carbon copy of what you expect them to be based upon the perception of the conference, but James Madison's going to run the ball a ton under Bob Chesney. 44 carries, 313 yards, 4 touchdowns on 7.1 yards per carry last week for the Dukes in their opening win against Weber State, the Fighting Damian Lillards. Now, are things going to change up a little bit? Potentially. I think that there's going to be some wrinkles in the game plan for James Madison, but the first key to success here for the Louisville, and it has taken me a little while to get to this point, but I had to introduce that context, controlling the line of scrimmage and winning the game in the trenches. You start on the defensive side. Like, James Madison is going to try to run all over the field. George Pettaway, Wayne Knight, both of these running backs almost getting to 100 yards last week. You're going to see some quarterback run action. Joby, I think it's Mallory, Malary. Like, they have a lot of players that are going to get a portion of that workload and try to throw you off your game. Now, here's the thing. I think Louisville is really well set up to defend the run. Like, I think that's the best thing that this Cardinals defense is at, or that's the best thing that they do. My apologies. That's the best thing that this Louisville defense does, is defend the run. Like, you look back the past 2 years under Jeff Brohm, yes, the passing defense has been vulnerable at times. The pass rush at times hasn't been great, but it feels like what has stayed consistent during that time was Louisville's ability to stop the run. And they've got the pieces on this year's team: Renee Conga, Jordan Girard on the interior, guys that are rotating in, Denzel Lowry, and company. Like, this is a really good rotation of interior defensive linemen, and also a rotation of good edge rushers that are going to be able to seal that edge off and make life tough for James Madison. So I think there's been a lot of, well, how can Louisville stop James Madison's run? And not as much of, well, how can James Madison find success against Louisville's defense, especially with how stout they can be in defending the run. It kind of plays into Louisville's strengths here if James Madison's going to run the ball a ton. Now, offensively, this is also something that's kind of getting lost. Like, you switch the size of the field and you look at the Louisville offense. Like, yeah, James Madison fans are bringing up the fact that they have a good running attack. Hello? Isaac Brown, Duke Watson, anyone? Only one of the best running back duos in the country? Isaac Brown had 6 carries last week. Didn't matter. 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. Yeah, sure. There might be a conversation of how can Louisville stop JMU, but let's flip that question. How can JMU stop Louisville? If you're going to sell out against the run for the Cardinals, good luck defending the wide receivers 1v1. And winning the battle at the line of scrimmage isn't only opening up those gaps for the running backs. It's protecting Miller Moss. And if you can protect Miller Moss and give him time to go through his reads, like, he already makes really quick decisions and quick reads anyway, this is going to be a really tough day at the office for the JMU defense. And look, I respect the Dukes defense. I respect the Dukes team as a whole because they have a deep defensive line. They have a solid back end of the secondary, although the cornerbacks are a little bit questionable. Top end talent at linebacker is solid, although depth is, one thing we have to question. But Amar Thomas, Terry Lockett, Emmanuel Bush, Aiden Gobera on that front, or in that front seven, like, this is going to be a pretty decent pass rush that Louisville's going up against. And I will admit, the offensive line needs to do a better job of opening up gaps for the running backs than they did last week. I think there were a couple times where EKU was just in the backfield, and not really much you could do about it if your name was Duke Watson, who had 2 carries for 2 yards. But then again, Isaac Brown with a couple of big-time runs. But it's just one of those things where, like, I'm hearing a ton of one side of the argument. But it's like we're forgetting that Louisville's rushing attack is better than James Madison's. No disrespect to the Dukes, Louisville's rushing attack is better than almost every other team in the country. You have Isaac Brown, who probably had the best week for a running back in all of college football last week, despite only getting 6 carries. He's a guy that, I mean, who knows? Maybe a Heisman contender if he can continue to play at this level. And I think that all of Card Nation is in unison when believing that he can. So I respect this James Madison team. I know that they're going to try to run the football a ton. They're going to try to set the tone at the line of scrimmage. They're going to try to take away Louisville's rushing attack and force them to throw the football. And I think that still could be a recipe for disaster because James Madison is much more one-dimensional, even though they can throw the football. Like, their identity is based upon running the football, as Louisville's is. But I trust Louisville's passing attack with Chris Bell, Colin Lacey, and Miller Moss than I do James Madison. So controlling the line of scrimmage and winning this game in the trenches is the first and utmost important key to success for the Louisville Cardinals, in my opinion. And when you look to the second section of keys to success, it's kind of cleaning up what happened last week. But there's also going to be something very critical that needs to happen as well. We'll discuss when we come back on this game day edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. First, I want to tell you about our friends over at DoorDash. It's the weekend. Time to look back to last week before this game and crown the week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered the most. Let's break it down. For the Louisville Cardinals, it was Colin Lacey who delivered in a big way. 93-yard punt return for a touchdown, over 200 all-purpose yards. When the pressure was on, he came through. No hesitation, no delay. You know that this performance wasn't a fluke because Colin Lacey's about to go on a streak of really good performances. And just like Lacey delivered for the Cardinals, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash Streaks. You save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day. Only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Also, before we get to the next segment, let's tell you about our friends over at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who choose to do more than simply move. They follow what moves them every time they drive, and that's what makes Mazda stand out. They go beyond safety, style, and performance to deliver a driving experience that feels alive in every detail. As an athlete focuses on every detail, Mazda does the same, from metallic accents to hand-stitched Napa leather. Whether it's a quick drive to practice or a weekend road trip, Mazda makes even everyday drives feel special. It's the small details that make the big plays. And just like there's more to every player, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. As always, thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services, including YouTube, 5 days a week, your team every day. Cards versus Dukes tonight at 7 o'clock, short week, ESPN2 primetime game tonight. We're continuing to discuss the keys to success for the Louisville Cardinals. The first one for me was controlling the line of scrimmage and winning the game in the trenches on both sides of the football. The second one, we'll discuss cleaning up some mistakes from last week, but first, I think that this is more important. I think that starting strong and dictating this game would be extremely beneficial for this team. And what I mean by that, there's two things. The first one, when you look at these upsets on a yearly basis for these group of 5 teams upsetting the Power 4 teams, what's usually the recipe for disaster? Well, the Power 4 teams allow those group of 5 teams to stay in the game, thus making this team believe that, hey, we can pull this off, guys, like they already didn't think that they could, but they're giving them more and more confidence. Because with these upset-minded teams, getting behind early on can be a recipe for disaster, even for an offense that runs the ball the majority of the time. Like this James Madison offense is predominantly running the football. Now, it's not one of those teams that has an 80-20 run-to-pass ratio, but, I mean, they, like I said, Sunbelt team, this is what they try to do. Now, Alonzo Barnett III can throw the football. Matt Sluka can throw the football, but when they're forced to throw the football, playing from behind, that's where I feel like Louisville will be at their most dangerous. If Louisville's scoring a ton of points, I find it very tough to believe that the Dukes are going to be able to hang with the Cardinals. Like, the lower scoring this game is, the better chance JMU has. Now, I know the forecast continues to change. It's becoming one of those things that we're watching more and more, but if it does end up raining, because there is some precipitation in the forecast, is it going to be a tough thing to do when you're trailing by 10 to 14 points all game to be able to throw the football in the rain? I guess it really depends on how much rain, when the rain comes. Like, there's a lot of moving factors here. And even if it does rain, like, I know the forecast is projecting a little bit, but at this point, it's kind of throwing a dart at the board. So if it rains, it rains. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Case in point, the Cardinals need to start strong, because if they do, they're going to be able to dictate the pace of play. They're going to be able to dictate how James Madison responds. And if they race out to an early lead, it's going to take JMU out of character and force them to throw the ball more. Like, they're not going to have the luxury of being able to eat up so much clock because you're trailing by that much. So being able to start strong and dictating this game is going to be a key focal point for this team. And that was something in 2023. Remember when Louisville was so good at winning the first quarter that it helped the team get to 10 wins. I know the schedule was a little bit easier, but I mean, merit still remains the same. When you're talking about winning games, setting the tone early on is key. But also, Louisville needs to limit the mistakes and play as clean of a game as they can, because the mistakes from last week against Eastern Kentucky you can live with. But can you live with those same mistakes and win this game comfortably against a JMU team that's much better than EKU? And I think that the answer could be yes, but you really don't want to put it to the test. 3-0 loss in the turnover battle. Now, I know the interceptions in the first half. One was a tip pass that was thrown just a little bit too high on the quarterback and on the receiver as well, but fell into the defensive back's arms and he ran it back for a touchdown. The second one was a fluky interception where perfectly placed ball was kind of being corralled in, and then it came loose, and Antonio Meeks kicked the ball up, and the EKU DB was just kind of standing there for the interception. As fluky as these interceptions are, they're still turnovers. So I understand maybe it's not something we worry about moving forward, but it is one thing that we need to highlight is like Louisville, even if you don't win the turnover battle, just don't lose it. Like if you control the football, if you don't lose possession and turn the ball over, it's going to make life that much more difficult for JMU, because I think one recipe for a disaster or recipe for an upset is giving your opponent short field position. And that's where the penalties come into play. Last week, the Louisville Cardinals accumulated 12 penalties, or they committed 12 penalties, accumulating 106 penalty yards. That's not good. I understand it's the first game. Even then, there's no excuse. Like, that is really, really bad. EKU had 8 penalties for 51 yards. But my gosh, that's a rough way to look at it. And it felt like at least half, if not more than half, of the penalty yardage was from special teams. There was the face mask. There was the illegal block in the back, holding, the unsportsmanlike call on Chris Bell. You have to be able to stay more composed, especially in the special teams. Like, I'm looking at the James Madison game against Weber State last week, just for reference on penalties. James Madison had 6 penalties for 75 yards. Again, they're kind of dealing with the same thing, but you're trying to play as clean of a game as you can, because not only is limiting the turnovers going to be key, but when you limit the penalties, you're not going to beat yourself, and you're going to go a long way in winning that field position battle. Like, how many plays did we see? I mean, Louisville had a touchdown wiped off the board. Now they ended up scoring on that drive, but there was a touchdown pass to Kewan Brown that got called back due to a hold. How many returns got called back? How much penalty yardage was accumulated, and how much yardage did you lose on the field because of those? So, you kind of combine them together into this taking care of business category. It starts with beginning the game on a high note, like being ready for James Madison, operating well offensively, making plays defensively, and not beating yourself throughout the game. If you're not beating yourself, it's going to be very difficult for JMU to beat you. So limit the mistakes, which includes not turning the ball over. I mean, yes, forcing turnovers is great as well, because it's going to be extremely beneficial to be able to capitalize off of those. But if you limit your turnovers, and you're never going to you're not going to eliminate all of the penalties, but if you significantly decrease those and you reduce the penalties and you reduce the penalty yardage, like, it's going to be key, especially on special teams. And that's sort of the lost art of winning football games. And we've seen Louisville win games because of special teams over the past couple of years. So starting strong, dictating the game, dictating the pace of play, forcing James Madison to be uncomfortable, and Louisville needs to limit their mistakes. And if they do that, they're going to be in a great spot to succeed. But we're not done yet, because we need to talk about the defense. Ron English's unit needs to show up and they need to show out in a couple of specific ways. We'll tell you what those are when we come back on the final preview segment of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Card Nation, are you still paying full price for gas? Stop leaving money behind. Get real cash back every time you fill up with the free Upside app. Simply download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and start earning cash at the pump today. Use my limited promo code FOOTBALL and get an extra 25 cents back per gallon in your first fill up. You can make up to $300 a year just from buying the gas you already needed. At first, I thought it was too good to be true, but it's totally legit. Real people are getting paid just to make their daily commutes, and you can as well. Plus, you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon or other brands. Don't let this offer drive on by. Download the free Upside app now using my limited time promo code FOOTBALL for a limited time 25 cent per gallon bonus. That's the promo code FOOTBALL. Offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions. We talked about the Louisville football spread. Well, today's episode of the show, of course, is FanDuel. The NFL season began last night, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for the opening weekend with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because of its versatility. It fits however I like to bet. Sometimes I like to go with just straight player props. Sometimes I like to build a same-game parlay. I like to have a money line parlay, you name it. And if I'm feeling like I want to live life on the edge, I jump into the live bets action as well. If you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. And then there was one more segment to conduct before the football game tonight. I'm extremely excited. Hope everyone is going to be able to try to make it out to Cardinal Stadium, and I hope, fingers crossed, that the rain holds off and it can be good weather at least until after midnight when the game ends. But we're continuing to identify the keys to success, right? Not the keys to victory, because Louisville's expected to win this game by double digits, but the keys to success, how they can win, how they can cover the spread. The first one, controlling the line of scrimmage and winning in the trenches. The second one was a section of handling business, starting strong, dictating the game, and limiting mistakes, playing a clean game. The third is centered around the defense. The Cardinals defense needs to show up, and it needs to show out. The JMU offense is, of course, much more respectable than EKU's offense. It's more dynamic. It has better playmakers, more talent on the offense than the team that they played week one. Now, I know Louisville's defense was successful in week one. The first-string defense didn't allow a single point. The point in the first half, or the touchdown in the first half, was the pick six. And the EKU offense wasn't even close to scoring against the Louisville first-team defense, which is a success. But, of course, now you're going to face like your first legitimate test of the season this week with the JMU offense that, on paper, judging based upon the style of play and what they like to do and what you're really good at, you should be in a great spot with Louisville's stout run defense. But there's some things we need to talk about because, you know, we talked about the styles of play, the trademark styles of play for the conferences. One thing about the Sun Belt that we need to reiterate is that a lot of these offenses like to run up tempo. Now, I know Satterfield's Appalachian State offense didn't, but I would expect, maybe not all game long, but there's going to be some plays, some drives where Bob Chesney is going to try to throw a curveball at Ron English and catch his defense off guard, catch them making mistakes, and catch them tired by running that up-tempo offense. Now, with that is limiting the big plays and the miscommunication. Last year, the name of the game for Louisville, the Achilles heel, was just giving up big plays. And for a couple different reasons, I think that miscommunication was huge, lost assignments, broken coverages, not knowing the plays in time or not relaying the plays in time. That's why you see Jeff Brohm spend so much time with his defense this offseason. That's why you saw Ron English start coaching on the sideline at the end of last year. And I would imagine that continues into this year. being on the same page, understanding what your role is, especially if you're going up against an offense that is playing up tempo. So you've got to know your role and what you're expected to do immediately, because obviously you don't have the time. You don't have the time to sit there and think about, well, I need to guard this gap. I need to defend this receiver, because like I said, up-tempo offense, not going to have the time in the play clock. So limiting the big plays and the miscommunication, especially in the up-tempo situations, I think is going to be key. Now, something else that Louisville didn't do well last year, still yet to be seen on how well they do against it this year, is defending the quarterback run. Now, Alonzo Barnett III isn't the best mobile quarterback, 6-foot junior from Whitsett, North Carolina. In his 4 seasons at James Madison, you look at the rushing stats, and 2024 last year was a career year. 442 yards on the ground, but only 3.3 yards per carry. Now, I would imagine that that is also factoring in sack yardage, so it's going to skew things a little bit. But he did have 7 rushing touchdowns, so something that you have to focus on. And how much is James Madison going to run that dual threat quarterback system? Probably not as much as last week against the Fighting Damian Lillards, but I think that you're going to see some design packages for UNLV transfer Matt Sluka to be able to come in and have some designed RPOs, some designed option plays, designed quarterback runs, because his 2 seasons at Holy Cross, actually he spent 4, but from 2021 to 23, 868 yards, 14 rushing touchdowns. 1,234 yards, 11 rushing touchdowns. 1,243 yards, 9 rushing touchdowns. Of course, that was under head coach Bob Chesney, so he understands what is being expected of him. And in a limited sample size last year, 253 yards and 1 touchdown for UNLV before transferring. Now, that is something that we have to take into consideration with the level of competition you're playing. But still, Louisville struggled against the mobile quarterback last year. Like, the Cardinals have to be able to understand their assignment and defend the run and limit those big plays on the ground. Because if you let JMU's quarterback play run all over the field, going to be a long day at the office for the Cardinals defensive 11. Now, the other aspect of this is you need to apply pressure. Of course, Dalton, yeah, of course, you need to get after the quarterback. But Alonzo Barnett last season, when he was pressured, was by the metrics one of the worst quarterbacks in the Sun Belt. So when you get pressure on James Madison's quarterback play, good things tend to happen because they tend to crumble under that pressure. Now, JMU has a decent offensive line. It's not a deep offensive line, but I would say it's decent. But I would imagine that this is where Cleve Lubin came from the Sun Belt, had 2 sacks in the game against Eastern Kentucky last year. This is where, he is going to be asked to, well, hey, you were a highly touted guy coming out of Coastal Carolina last year. This is where you prove it. AJ Green, Adonijah Green, this is where he is going to be asked to continue to make those plays, and not to mention the interior as well. So Cleve Lubin in the Sun Belt last year had 9.5 sacks. Now, when he played against James Madison, they lost 39-7. He had 4 total tackles and 0 sacks. So maybe playing with better players is going to help, considering that offenses can't just circle him as the one guy to scheme around. So Louisville's defense needs to make sure that they limit the big plays, especially with the up-tempo offensive plays. Apply pressure to Alonzo Barnett, force him to speed up that internal clock and make decisions earlier, thus making him more prone to turning the ball over and containing the quarterbacks, whether it's Alonzo Barnett III or Matthew Sluka. But Cardinals expected to win this game tonight against James Madison, 13.5-point favorites against the Dukes. I think that they win. Will they cover the spread? To be determined, but I think it's possible. That's going to wrap up this preview action of the Locked On Louisville podcast. We'll see you back here after the game. Go Cards.